welcome to Doc Talk with Dr. G on this hot, sizzling Thursday evening. Well, whoever prayed for summer weather and heat, your prayers have been answered. I hope it's warm enough for you here tonight and the last couple of days, and we have more heat to come. Apparently, we're going to be experiencing 30-degree weather for the next several days. So lots of vitamin D, natural vitamin D. We don't have to take any vitamin D supplements, so our mood should be improving. And if you're like me, you'll get darker by the day. And I think by the end of the next few days, I may be the darkest I've been for quite a while. But in any event, welcome so much to the program tonight. We have a very pivotal topic, a very serious topic tonight, and an expert in the area. So tonight we're going to be focusing on this topic, which is unmasking toxic relationships. And it was actually on the heels of the program from last week with Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, who talked about a situation that she got into with a man that she thought was just the ideal man for her, and jumped into a long-term relationship and ended up marrying the man. And it turned out that the relationship was extremely toxic. And she didn't pick up on the signs in the beginning, in the first few months and first couple of years even. But then as time built, she realized that she was in a very toxic relationship. And it just kept getting from bad to worse. And then it ended up, escalating to emotional abuse, physical abuse. And police had to be involved. And from that program, many of you commented and asked questions and really mentioned that it really resonated with you, that you had a very difficult and painful experience with the relationships. And so we thought we'd devote an entire program to unmasking toxic relationships. And we're going to really be addressing three key questions, actually four key questions. One is, what are the red flags for a toxic relationship? I mean, relationships have turbulence, but what makes a relationship not just tough, but actually toxic? So we're going to talk about the red flags for it. And what distinguishes a narcissist from someone who's just simply egocentric, just has a big ego and is self-centered? The term narcissist gets thrown around really, really easily. And we want to really define what truly is a narcissist, because it is truly a disorder. And then managing toxic relationships. When you're in a toxic relationship, do you try to mend the relationship? Do you try to bring that relationship to health? Or do you, if I could use a metaphor, call it a DNR, do not resuscitate? Is it time in some cases to break free and leave the relationship for various reasons, some of which could include even safety? And then finally, self-care, reclaiming your dignity and worth, because on the heels of a toxic relationship, there are many emotional wounds, sometimes even physical wounds. And so we want to ask the question, how does one heal after sustaining especially a long toxic relationship? I'm here at Symposium Cafe in Barrie, and I just got served some coffee. Thank you very much. And we have a very special guest for us who, on this topic, finds it very personal. Her name is Natalie McDowell, and Natalie is a nurse, a certified health coach, and a neuro-linguistic program expert. And so Natalie will bring to us experience not only from a professional point of view, having researched the topic extensively, but from a personal, very personal point of view, having gone through a toxic relationship herself. Really not really necessarily always like aiming to become an expert in toxic relationships, but that's how it evolved, having experienced it personally. And she is actually the founder of a program called Survive to Thrive. I love the name of that program, Survive to Thrive, where you're not just basically on maintenance, but you're actually thriving after being exposed to a toxic relationship. And then we're going to leave some time for sure for questions and comments. And if this follows the same trend as last week, I think many of you will be engaged in this topic. So without any further ado, I would like to bring in our guest here, Natalie McDowell. Natalie, thank you so much for joining our program here tonight. And we really are honored to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you, everybody who's listening in or will get the replay. I know that your time is valuable, so thank you for giving me your time. And I hope in return I can give you lots of value today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalie. Maybe just project your voice just a little bit more, just because I think my voice may be overpowering, and I've got the amplified me more. So Natalie, um, you obviously didn't want to find yourself in this situation, having gone through a lengthy and very difficult toxic relationship. Can you just speak to us about that? And obviously, you fell in love with this man, and you thought that this was the man for you, a partner, and this was going to be a healthy, long-term relationship. Can you just take us through what happened when you started noticing problems, when you started noticing that this is a very serious problem going on here? I'm in a toxic relationship.
Yeah, so it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a process of a cycle of abuse, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. Um, but ultimately, in my situation, there was multiple times where I did leave. So I did get up the courage to leave. Um, but due to now I'm realizing after the fact that there was definitely a trauma bond involved. So I went back on multiple occasions um, to ultimately being in a very dark place of if I don't do something about this and leave for good, my health was deteriorating, my emotional health was deteriorating, my mental health. Um, so really, really kind of what ultimately gave me the courage was really starting to focus on myself. So engaging in some self care. It takes it takes all of the because you're so focused on the chaos of the relationship that when you start to focus on yourself, you start to realize that you can start to take your power back. So ultimately, when I left, it was a situation where I really didn't have much of a choice, you could say. I was pushed to the brink. Um, but the problem is that after leaving is you think that things are going to get better as normal relationships do. They may get worse first, but ultimately as people go their own separate ways, things get better, right? So I was really faced with the realization that these types of relationships, especially with a narcissist, that they don't get better, they escalate to extreme levels. And I was really struggling with that because I thought, well, things should get better in a sense. I should be feeling better. I'm away now, I'm on my own, but I wasn't. I wasn't in a good place. And then it was really like my physical health was deteriorating. I was having some heart issues. I realized that I needed to really take control and really fight for more of a calm and peace in my life. So that's when I really started digging deep into the aftermath of these types of relationships and really the deep wounds that are caused, and they do require to be healed, and then also to recognize that these types of people, their abuse does escalate after, and it just transitions to more of a separation abuse, which actually can be much worse. So, recognizing the effects of the relationship and recognizing post separation abuse is a real thing, and kind of really just healing and navigating how to deal with them. Especially when you have children, you don't have the great ability of going no contact with them. You have to still be in contact with them. So it's really navigating how to safeguard yourself and your children.
And Natalie, how long did this process take? Like from the time you first met, got married, and then when the turbulence really started, and then when you realized that this is much more serious and you had to extricate yourself from the relationship.
Well, to be really quite honest, like looking back now, there was a lot of red flags going into the relationship. And you could say that I had I wasn't in the greatest space myself, so I didn't recognize the red flags. So there was red flags there. It's just they escalated. And the thing is with these types of relationships, as you implement boundaries, as you start to stand your ground, they will escalate too. So I think I started to really work on myself, which meant in return, um, I was able to set more boundaries and to really sort of challenge him, and in return, things just got way worse. So
So let's jump right into that. This seems
yeah,
like a smooth segue. So can you talk about maybe some of those red flags that you noticed?
Yes. So ultimately, just a really quick explanation to sort of understand that might resonate with some people of an example. So I think of like these types of relationships like a game of tug of war. So ultimately, in a healthy relationship, you're both in the same team, you're working together. In these types of relationships, it's like they're working against you. So you become the opponent and you have a deep sense of fighting for your life and just kind of maintaining to keep above the water. So it takes a tremendous amount of mental and emotional stress on you, and their goal is to gain control of you and to win. So when we think of that, the three red flags are going to be based around control tactics. So emotional manipulation, um, I'm not going to focus on the specific tactics they use. I'm going to focus more on how you might be feeling so you can identify if you are experiencing this. When we speak to emotional manipulation, it's basically the end result is you're going to feel disconnected. So you're going to feel disconnected from your sense of self and from reality. So, in abusive situations after the fact, you're going to question, was it really that bad? You're going to question what's real, what's not real. You're going to lose your sense of self. So that's the emotional manipulation, the actual outcome of that.
Okay. And is that an easy symptom to identify, like if you're in a relationship, or did it take a while to sort of figure out that there's this sort of emotional manipulation going on and you're in essentially a perpetual state of conflict with your partner?
Yeah, it definitely, you don't realize it's happening, right? Like it's not really till you step back that you can really see that. Um, but like no, I could say that nobody told me that, right? I had to kind of come to that on my own. So I'm kind of hoping to bring awareness that these are some feelings that are associated with that tactic of manipulation.
Is that along with that, you also mentioned the lack, when we had a discussion earlier about some of the red flags, the lack of empathy and emotional support. Can you just elaborate on that as well, Natalie?
Yes. Yeah. So coming along with that is these types of personality disorders and toxic relationships. They can have the person can have a lack of empathy or no empathy, and therefore not offering you emotional support. So the lack of empathy is a lack of understanding of feelings and sympathizing with feelings. So it ultimately leaves you with no emotional support. So you feel very isolated and alone. And to kind of really briefly say that, as humans, we want to feel seen, heard, accepted, and unconditionally loved. And none of those things you're going to get from that relationship. So it feels, you feel alone. You don't feel heard. You feel like the love is conditional. You don't feel validated in your feelings. You don't feel important. So that's really a key sign right there.
Can you, Natalie, can you uh, point to a specific example? Like I believe at the time you were doing hospital nursing, so you were working hard, then coming home, and then eventually you had twins. I understand.
Yeah.
Like, can you speak to a specific example to what your partner did to show absolute lack of empathy and emotional support? Like a specific example that you can think of that maybe may have been particularly hurtful or memorable.
You could say that, like, bringing up something that's really bothering you, something that's maybe you had a bad day, you dealt with the situation. It's like they don't care to hear you. Um, they can't empathize. Maybe you're upset about something. They're going to brush it off. The lack of
Right.
empathy is very prevalent in. We're going to actually get into that, but it's prevalent in. There's nobody that's really exempt from the punishment that they will inflict on you in order to gain control and win. So children are not exempt from it. It's like they're on a war path and they don't care who they destruct on that path. So that's a real key example of a lack of empathy in that
So,
person.
so can I say maybe like you come home, you had a maybe perhaps a challenging day at nursing at the hospital. You come home, you try and share it with your partner, and he either just not doesn't listen or just minimizes it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. you get to the point where you don't express how you feel anymore, right? You just keep it all in, or you, in a sense, like rush through how you're speaking because you don't want to take up their time. You're feeling like you're a bother to them. You're not going to be feel supported really in any aspect. You're not working on the same team.
I understand. Okay, and what about this?
Yeah. So the ultimate result of the controlling behaviors um, is you're going to feel a sense of like you're trapped. You're trapped in a box, and you feel stuck. You feel like there's no way out. You feel a sense of fear. Um, so they will try to control many aspects of your life. You could say in a way of monitoring you, um, you know, monitoring your behaviors, your actions, controlling what you do.
Monitoring, I mean, as in like stalking you, following you. What
Yeah,
do you mean?
that can be, yeah, like not necessarily say the stalking or the harassment. It's more likely after the relationship has ended.
Right.
But their whole point is that they use tactics to control, to try to maintain control over you, right? Which makes you feel a sense of being completely stuck and there's no way out.
Okay. Okay. Now, Natalie, the other thing, oftentimes this is paired with a narcissist in a relationship. A narcissist is causing the toxicity in a relationship. And that term gets thrown around a lot by a lot of people. They probably overdiagnose, perhaps. Would you agree? Like, what
Yeah.
I mean, people just say, oh no, they break up with someone and say, well, he was a narcissist. You hear that almost uniformly. Everybody was a narcissist.
Yeah.
Like, it seems that way, anyways. So, again, how do you diagnose a narcissist as opposed to someone who just happens to be selfish, like many people are?
Yes, absolutely. Like it's definitely kind of an umbrella term for seems to be anything these days. But there is very specific characteristics of NPD. Egocentric and narcissist, they both are similar in a sense. They're both self-centered. But there is a very specific process of diagnosing a narcissist. And it does require a mental health professional to do this diagnosis. But the problem is likely not ever, they're likely not ever to actually get a diagnosis because of their personality traits. They're not going to seek help because they don't necessarily self reflect, right? So you're not going to get a diagnosis, but there's very prevalent traits. And I believe that we have a list of.
Yeah, I'll bring it up because you did actually mention this really a very specific
Mhm.
list of narcissistic behaviors. So let's just kind of go through those one by one.
Yes. So ultimately, the mental health professional goes through and see if they have any of these traits. So there's 9 traits in total, and if they exhibit 5 of them, they consider them having NPD. Along with that, they ask them specific questions that relate to empathy. So they talk about their family and things, and they see if they have signs of empathy. So between the two things, they're able to make a diagnosis. So they have the grandiose sense of self, right? They're better than everybody. They're superior. They fantasize about success and power. Um, yeah, they believe that they're special and unique. They deserve special treatment above other people. They need to constantly receive external supply in the form of admiration, praise. They have the sense of entitlement, right? You're going to see that in how they treat other people, waitresses. That's a big red flag on first dates and stuff. Exploitative behavior. Their behavior can be very they can go into rage easily. Their behaviors are very unpredictable. They're very inconsistent.
Is there usually a lot of anger associated with a narcissist?
Um, it's just like the anger is unpredictable, right? So that's what leaves you on walking on eggshells. They have it's called narcissistic rage. It's quite terrifying, actually. Um,
Did you experience that, Natalie, yourself?
yeah, yeah, it's
Can you
terrifying.
just are you able to discuss that? Like what narcissistic rage like looks like?
Um, I'm not going to be too specific, just for kind of for like
Okay,
safety kind of
of
reason.
course.
But it's just a basically they go into that rage because you've infringed on their. They have a true self and a false self. They try to keep their true self, their authentic self, hid. So it'll be triggered by you saying something that infringes on their security and their self esteem. Then they will just lose it. So they're like, lose it. You're terrified. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to intimidate you to try to get you to be compliant, right? So that's where we talk about courage, right? You have to have courage.
In the beginning phases, though, before you finally had that courage, were you terrified to the point where you just thought, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna comply to keep the peace, if you will, to settle him down, or somehow
Yes.
thinking
Yeah.
that will be effective?
Yes. Yeah. You become docile, right? Because it's a coping mechanism, right? You disconnect from your sense of self to sort of cope with the scenario. So it's another effect from an aftermath that you really have to dig up because you feel a sense of disconnect, and it's a coping mechanism during abuse, right? You disconnect from the experience.
One thing you often hear from women, particularly women, obviously it can be men or women that are subjected to narcissistic behavior of a partner. But one thing you hear is somehow they feel that if they do something, that they can settle the behavior of the narcissist. If there's just something they can do differently, then they can control their behavior. Did you go through that yourself, Natalie, where you thought,
Oh
well,
yeah,
you know what, if I don't do this, then he won't have this rage?
yeah. You walk on eggshells all the time, right? That's what you do. You don't want them to be triggered, right? So you go into kind of a sense of a people pleasing, fawning phase of trauma, right? Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned lack of empathy earlier. Um, what about this envious of others? Does that mean, like, would they be envious of, like, say, your friends or family? Like, if you're spending time, say, with your parents and your children, is that the kind of envy that you experience when the narcissist is in a relationship?
It can be in that sense, but it's more of an envious of people that are doing better than them, right? They want to maintain that level of being better than other people, right? Being superior. So it's more of people that infringe on that aspect of it. If they think that you're lower than them, you're not a threat to them, right? So that's
Right.
kind of the envy of people that are doing better than they are.
Okay. And then arrogant attitude would be the other character.
Yes.
So these, I believe, are nine characteristics, Natalie.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that to meet the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, then you require five of these nine.
Yes.
Okay, so it's very specific. Obviously, like a lot of people will throw the term around just very loosely, just with someone who perhaps hurt them in a relationship, perhaps was dominant. But this is
So
very specific.
yeah,
Okay, now
just
what about?
a
Yeah,
very
sorry, go ahead.
good thing about that is for to see those behaviors. It's not it's consistent across their life. So it's not like some people use it after a relationship. Those behaviors are consistent with everybody, your
Okay,
children, but it'll be exaggerated with you, and maybe
okay.
exaggerated with you.
Understood.
Yeah.
So, Natalie, let's talk about a person who's just egocentric, not a narcissist, and then we'll elaborate on how you actually tell the difference between the two.
Yeah. So just some self-centered behaviors. They're focused on themselves. It's more of like a you could say like a selfish person, right?
Right.
That lack of self-awareness. They're not really self-aware. Yeah, they don't like to share attention. So these are kind of just kind of all around, just kind of more of a selfish person, right? Limited perspective taking, yeah, self-promotion. Yeah, so they're somewhat self-explanatory. The big
Yes.
difference is in what makes them different, right? They're very specific. So the motivation is very different. A narcissist's motivation comes from a deep-seated need for exterior validation. So all of their validation comes externally from an external source. So they don't pull from anything internal to bring them happiness or fulfillment. It's about buying things, right? It's about everything external, people, things. lifestyle. And they also have a deep-seated insecurity and self-esteem, as we spoke about, which the egocentric person, they can have some self-validation. They're not void of self-validation, and they do not necessarily have deep-seated insecurities or low self-esteem. So there's two very distinct things.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that, Natalie, about this need for validation, uh, it sounds to me like you would be at the epicenter as a partner to the narcissist. You would be the one that they're looking to mostly for that self validation. So that puts a lot of weight on you. Did you palpate that weight, like the sense that, well, I need to make him feel happy. I need to make him feel good about himself. That's a lot of responsibility that a person has shifted to you.
Yeah, exactly. And when you stop giving that, right? You stop giving that because you don't see that in that person.
Okay.
So yeah.
Um, Okay, so now we move on. We're going along at a good pace, and we're going to open it up for some comments and questions shortly. But let's go on to managing the toxic relationship. Just maybe take us through these points.
Yeah. So ideally, managing a toxic relationship. So I think it was kind of to the sense of should you go or should you stay? I think that was part of that one, eh?
Yeah, definitely. Should you go or should you stay? For sure.
Yeah. So it's obviously when we consider the circumstances, it's very muchly obviously a very personal decision, right? Nobody can make that decision for you. That's something that you need to come to on your own. But outside of that, there's some things that you can do in the meantime. If you're still in a toxic relationship, there's things that you can do. And we spoke a little bit about that. And it's really about focusing on you internally, on working on you, right? Because if you're in a good place, you'll be able to make that decision to stay or leave from a place of clarity. Um, yeah, so those are them. So personal decision. We talked about your intuition. When you focus inward, you can trust your internal guide to help you make that decision. Focusing on the big picture, right? So healthy relationships, like you mentioned at the beginning, they do have ups and downs, right? That's going to happen, but they're hills and valleys, right? These types of relationships, toxic relationships, they're very highs and very lows. So they're like Mount Everest and a valley. So that's the difference. You can step back and it's very high and low. It's not this kind of up and down.
Right. There's no equilibrium. It's like basically
Yeah, it's
always
really good or
intense.
really bad.
Yeah. So on the positive side, though, when that intensity of the positive experience comes along, does that, like, at least in the early phases, did it give you hope that, wow, this can actually work out because we're having a great time right now?
That's what keeps you hooked, right? The good times keep you hooked. It's part of like the intermittent reinforcement and the trauma
Right.
bond. And that's the dangerous part because those highs are very good. You get some dopamine, you get some good hormones, and that's what keeps the addiction going, right?
Now,
Um,
do you feel that people that stay in a toxic relationship are addicted to that person?
there's definitely an aspect of a trauma bond through like the cycle of abuse, and there is like a an actual addiction. It's on uh, like it's an internal addiction. It's similar to a drug addiction. It's just as prevalent. You get those good hormones released. They actually they do not dampen the bond. They actually strengthen the bond. So it's a real thing, and you cannot control it. Right? It happens on an internal level. So there's definitely an addiction aspect of it for sure. That's what keeps you, and that's what people will understand. Why are you staying? Why do you go back? Right? There's a big
Right.
pitch that's involved.
So obviously there is something that you're getting out of the relationship, albeit pathological. You're still getting something out of the relationship.
Yeah, like you get addicted to the little crumbs of affection that you get here and there, right?
What's a good metaphor? Crumbs of affection. So just
Yeah, it's
giving
so
you.
small, right? But it's just enough to
Wow.
keep you addicted, right?
Yes. You mentioned in our preamble when we were talking about doing the program, love bombing. Uh, and that term kind of
You found
it
that funny.
resonated with me because I just think of these like bombs like being thrown. and all their collateral damage that these love bombs do. Can you just talk about these love bombs as part of the toxic relationship and how it kind of keeps you hooked, if you will, for
Mhm.
longer than perhaps you would have liked?
Yeah, so that's ultimately the love bombing, the honeymoon phase. It's the first phase of the cycle of abuse. It's where they shower you with attention. It's when you first meet. They don't always do this, so I'm just going to reiterate that it's not always this extreme, but it's where basically it's like they're too good to be true. That's a red flag, right?
Yes,
They're too
yes.
good to be true. So that is what gets you hooked. So after you receive that type of attention, then they go to start devaluing you, right? You become so confused because it's such a confusing phase. You were just treated so well, and now you're being treated terribly. It creates this internal conflict, and then they discard you, and then they hoover you. So it's a cycle that happens that keeps you going back, right? You keep just craving that initial phase, the honeymoon phase or the love bombing phase.
Okay. Natalie, I want to talk a bit about abuse before going on to management plan of whether you're going to stay or leave. Can you just maybe speak to, like, abuse is a very like generic and a wide word. Like, do you feel like what are the different types of abuses that a narcissist might inflict upon their partner? And again, it could be a woman inflicting on a man. It's not always gender specific.
Not, no.
Um, what are the sort of types of perhaps emotional abuses, physical abuses, and um, are there any abuses that are sort of, I guess, more manageable than others that potentially more reversible for someone in a toxic relationship? So two questions. Number one is sort of the different types of abuses and spectrum of abuse, and second question is there any point in which when you experience abuse, the relationship could still be redeemable, or should that be an immediate red flag to flee as far away as possible, if you will?
Yeah, so like there's obviously different types of abuse, right? So we know of our physical abuse and our emotional abuse, right? Emotional abuse is kind of underestimate that type of abuse, right? It can have very long lasting effects. Um, but there's something to say for abuse in general that um, especially when there's law enforcement involved, they're going to ask you those questions, right? And another form of abuse is maybe they're not physically harming you, or it's not, an abusive sense of emotional, but it's like a physical aggression, right? So it's the abuse that comes through intimidation and fear of, maybe trashing your house or throwing things, or that's also a type of abuse, right? It's to basically intimidate you, make you feel fearful.
Do you
And
feel, Natalie, oftentimes when we were training in medicine and domestic abuse, we were always told that abuse is progressive and it'll always get worse. Do you feel like, from your own personal experience, but also from the research that you've done, that there should be an extremely low threshold, like for leaving a relationship as soon as you experience
mm,
obvious abuse, even if it's emotional abuse, demeaning, degrading, humiliation, shaming in front of
yeah.
people? Should the person already start thinking about ending the relationship when abuse begins, even at the so-called sort of early phases of emotional humiliation, intimidation phase?
Yeah, like ultimately, um, you know, you have to make a decision, right? Because, you know, if you comply, if you become a docile and compliant, right? Um, that may appease them a little bit, right? But
Yes.
ultimately, you cannot live your life that way. So you ultimately do want to grow, you want to progress, and as you progress they're going to escalate because they're losing control, they're grabbing straws as they're falling, right? So
Yes.
ultimately we all want to grow, so those toxic situations you're not going to be in a place where you can grow, and that's when I talk about the trade-off. There's always a trade-off, right? You cannot remain in those sorts of situations and feel mentally, emotionally, physically healthy. There's a trade-off. Is it worth the trade-off? And that's when you refocus on yourself, you'll see that it is worth the trade-off to leave, right?
Okay. So, Natalie, that kind of segues nicely into sort of the management plan. If you could kind of take us through some of the points of a management plan.
Yeah. So ultimately, like if you're still in the relationship, like I already said,
Yeah,
focus on yourself. Focus
yeah. Well, like what's I guess it can be both. It can be management plan on whether to stay and mend the relationship, or management plan on leaving the relationship. So maybe you can kind of take us through these points, and at what point you should definitely leave the relationship.
Yeah, so these are ultimately, I think at the very end, we kind of go into more like the healing stage. So these questions could pertain to if you're in the still in the relationship or if you've already left. It's really about focusing on you, right? It's when you turn the focus off them and you focus on yourself, you regain power and control, right?
Right.
Which you need all the power and control you can get in these sorts of situations. Take responsibility. A lot of times we feel like we're being controlled, like we're in that box, but there's always things that we can take responsibility for, right? So, that was my big step in, ultimately my first step when I was still in the relationship is like, hey, listen, I can't control all this. I can't control the behavior, but what can I take control? What can I take responsibility for? And that was really working on myself. So take responsibility for what you can and let go of the things that you cannot
Okay.
control or take responsibility for.
So, Natalie, just as a point of encouragement, our numbers are growing as you speak. So, this is a good thing that people are engaged. And Bear Berry is already has a question, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that question shortly. Bear, she's asking about toxic sibling abuse. So that's a very good question, actually,
Mhm.
because I imagine a lot of the principles can apply, and we'll get to that shortly. But let's just talk about now reclaiming dignity and worth. So basically, self care, Natalie, and maybe you can just take us through these points.
Yeah. So ultimately, I think of like a snowball fight happening, right? What do? You try to get away. You try to create a distance from the person, right? And this can be done, it can't always be done on a physical level, right? Perhaps it's not like you can move across the country, right? But you can definitely create an emotional distance from them. So that's the number one thing. Once you are in a place where you have created that distance, you can start to heal.
Right. Is that risky, Natalie? Like when you start creating emotional distance, you're now essentially severing yourself from the person emotionally,
Yes.
and that's the very thing they don't want. That's like their worst nightmare, if you will, because they're looking to you for validation, and now you're doing the exact opposite. You're going the other direction, emotionally, metaphorically, and maybe even physically. So, is this take a lot of courage, first of all, and secondly, is this a dangerous phase when you start creating distance from the abuser?
Yes. Yeah. It's a terrifying phase.
Did
Because
you
they will go to extreme levels to try to to try to maintain control, right? Because they realize they're losing. And remember, their two main goals are to win and to control you, right? So they're losing. They're losing the battle, and they will go to extremes. But like I said, courage is your number one best friend, right? But that's a personal, unique that I talk about that in my program. Like, it's a very personal decision. Nobody can tell you. You know yourself what's going to be safe to do or not, right?
So just expand that a little bit for us, Natalie, or create distance from abuser, the responsibility that you have to take for your own action.
Yep, yep. So you're not responsible for their actions. You cannot change them. All you are responsible for is your reaction to their reactions, right? So how
Okay.
you respond, the art of responding, right? Creating distance from that initial, they trigger you, they gaslight you, creating a distance so you're ultimately responding or not responding at all so that you're emotionally safeguarding yourself. Setting boundaries is like absolutely paramount with these people because they need strict boundaries. They don't respect boundaries. They don't think boundaries apply to them, but you still need to set them. You need to maintain them. It's your responsibility to maintain them, and it's your responsibility to set consequences and follow through with them.
Okay.
Don't validate poor behavior. This is like a huge one. This has saved me a gazillion times. It still saves me today. Is if their behavior is poor, don't validate it. So don't, even if you get that text, they're accusing you of something right away. You want to defend yourself. You want to fire something back, or you want to explain to them why it's not true. They don't
Right.
care if your reaction is positive or negative. They got what they wanted. They got a supply from you,
Right.
don't validate poor behavior. Don't even respond. Don't acknowledge it. Um,
Wow, that's a really important point because I think the tendency instinctively is to respond, defend,
yeah,
maybe settle them down, show them that maybe they can understand your perspective. But you're saying they're not going to. A narcissist is not
their
going to be able
purpose
to.
is
They don't
not
have the empathy to really care about what you're
their
thinking.
purpose is not to have a good discussion and solve something. Their purpose is to get a reaction. So they don't.
Interesting because, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So don't validate poor behavior. Don't try to defend yourself. Don't negotiate. Don't just don't validate it. That's it.
It's very interesting because I think this is a common thread in a lot of these toxic relationships. Because I know a few friends, both males and females, who've gone through toxic relationships, and you often say, "Oh, here they go again. They're texting. Here we go again," and then they draw them in and they get them all fired up. And usually it's late in the evening or at nighttime when they're
Yes.
tired. They should be going to bed. They're just like they're trying. It seems to me, and is that fair to say that they're actually just pushing that button? They're just trying to push
They're
the
just
button.
baiting. It's like a fish
Baiting, yeah, good
that
word.
goes out the fishing line and the bait. They're trying to bait you to get you on their hook to maintain control, and ultimately, if you take it, you're swimming for your life again. So I say don't take the bait. Positive, even if they're sending you a nice message, when you're in a good place, you can respond if you like. But even
Yes.
positive comments can be a form of bait to hoover
Okay.
you back into the relationship.
So, Natalie, I just want to talk about the last point, which is healing your body. Let's talk about this, and then we're going to open things up for comments and discussion. So, uh, take us through a person that's been obviously hurt emotionally, possibly even physically, unfortunately,
Yeah.
and now they have to heal their wounds and the aftermath of a toxic relationship.
Yeah, so this is fairly in depth. I'll just briefly touch on it. Is the awareness of the wounds, right? Because, like I said, we think that we leave these relationships and everything gets better, right? But the aftermath and devastation of these relationships cause very deep wounds. So we need to be aware of that. It's like getting in a car accident and keep driving your car, right? We're not going to have a smooth ride. We're going to feel the effects of it. So it's really about examining the effects that you're experiencing and really healing from it, right?
Okay.
So the first, these wounds don't go away; they only go deeper as we sort of bury them. So really, awareness of the wounds, building that relationship with yourself because that's taken the biggest hit, right? We've disconnected from ourselves in a way that we no longer know who we are anymore. We no longer we're not connected to our heart, so we're not listening to our intuition. We're disconnected from our emotions, right? Because we didn't have a choice. It was a coping mechanism. So really developing a good relationship with yourself is really the number one thing. Recognizing your wounds, managing stress. These relationships cause a great deal of stress. Even after the relationship is over, you may find yourself in a constant state of stress where you're in a fight and flight. So you're stuck on or you're stuck off where you're in a freeze phase where you feel numb and kind of emotionless. So healing from the stress and then knowing techniques to deal with the stress when it comes, right? Psychological stress mainly.
So, Natalie, can you speak to that woman, sort of almost look in the screen, and just speak to that woman who's been through a toxic relationship, has been incredibly emotionally hurt and wounded, and the divorce is all completed, the child custody issues are dealt with, but she's still internally in conflict, if you will, with herself. She's still wounded. She's still hurt. She may have a lot of anger, shame, guilt, and she's wondering, well, should I start dating again? Maybe if I find that ideal man that's healthy, that's going to help in my healing. What do you say to that woman? Like, at what point does a person know that they're healed, and what's the impact of entering another relationship after being through one toxic one?
Yeah, so it's very easy to jump into another relationship because we feel so neglected, right? So somebody gives us attention, right? But ultimately, from like the depths of my being, you need to have a relationship with yourself first, right? You need to develop. You need to teach yourself what love looks like, what it feels like. You need to regain trust. Two of the main things that survivors struggle with is a lack of trust in others and a lack of trust in themselves. When you gain that trusting relationship with yourself, you're going to naturally be able to trust others. You're going to notice the counterfeit, right? You're going to see the red flags. You know, people
Right.
are terrified of getting one another in these relationships, but if you develop the relationship with yourself first, you're going to notice what unhealthy looks like, right?
Right.
So you
Right.
have to take the time. It's not really an option. Like, you need to take the time to heal, to face your wounds, to reconnect with yourself.
Now, do you feel that a lot of people that are into a second, perhaps third relationship, that they're just basically two traumatized people trying to look to the other person to heal them?
Yeah, like, I'm not sure. I guess it'd be depending on the specific situation, right? We want to have a self-validation system, right? That we're reliant on ourselves to have fulfillment, right? So we cannot, yes, we can receive support from a partner like that, but we need to be fulfilled ourselves, right? Because it's our responsibility to create a fulfillment within, and then we can bring to the relationship a whole person, right?
Okay. Thanks. So, Natalie, we're going to turn to our listeners now and start addressing some questions. And then at the end, I'd like to conclude with talking about your program, Survive to Thrive, and
Mhm.
how people can join that program. And even maybe they just want to email you for some questions. Are you open to that, to
Yes.
people emailing you? Okay.
Yeah.
So, here's the first question from Bear Berry. Thank you, Bear Berry. Are you still there? Maybe you just add a comment that you're still here and listening. She asked a really good question. What about toxic sibling abuse? We certainly see a lot of dysfunctional sibling relationships and a lot of hurt there. Can you, Natalie, apply? Also, Bear is still here. Thank you for that question. Can you address that to Bear? How can you apply some of these principles to a toxic sibling relationship, and how do you diagnose that one, and how do you manage that one? Is there any differences as opposed to a romantic relationship?
Like, you can apply the same method, right? So you create the distance, you set boundaries, you maintain your boundaries, you set consequences. It's the same thing. It's creating an emotional distance, right? So that you're safeguarding your emotional state. So it's very, very possible. I know you're saying it's a sibling.
Yeah.
Lots of us are dealing with having to still communicate with our ex partners due to children. So we cannot escape them. Um, but, you know, being a sibling and an ex partner, they're still part of our life, right? So you can still create it's the same idea. You're creating the distance, the emotional distance, setting boundaries, all about safeguarding you, because you cannot control them. So what do you need to do for yourself to protect you?
Okay.
I don't know if that's
Okay.
helpful. You can let me know.
Yeah. Bear, maybe you can just comment if that was helpful. If you have any other questions about that specific question about sibling um, uh, toxic relationships as well. Okay, so Natalie, I'm going to put up your contact information here, which is it's a very catchy name, by the way. Thrive, so survive to thrive, and your email is thrive@2thrive.ca. And are you going to be having a website soon, Natalie?
Yeah, so my program is going to be launched online within the next about 2 to 3 weeks. It'll be launched online, so it'll be an online program, and you'll be able to work at it at your own pace with like workbooks. Then you also have access to me, so you get some one-on-one coaching, and then you have access to a really good support group of survivors just like you through a Facebook program, and we meet once a week for coaching. So
And how is the program like? Is it live or is it pre recorded and streamed?
yes, it's pre-recorded and streamed. So you can work at it at your own pace. And
Okay.
then if you're having any struggles, you can reach out to me. And we also have the coaching calls too with me too.
So when they register in the program, they have access to counseling with you directly, like one-on-one counseling.
Yes, there is a certain amount of
Okay.
sessions that's included. Yes.
Okay. How did you craft the program? I mean, this is a like to say it's a huge topic is an understatement, but it's also a topic that resonates with so many people.
Mhm.
How did you even start? Like, how do you start creating a program like this, researching essentially toxic relationships, narcissism, domestic abuse, and then coming up with this very elaborate and extensive program. How did you go about it? How long did it take?
Yeah, a long time. um,
I bet.
yeah. So my program is based on, I also took into account of over 800 survivors. So I included their struggles, incorporated it all into my program. And I sort of came to a place where I seen there was a lot of similarities in the aftermath. So what they are experiencing in the aftermath of the relationship. And then also the post separation abuse. So those can be both happening at the same time. So it's really about, we go into an awareness phase, become aware of what your wounds are, become aware of NPD, like really we get into depth of what it really is because you want to study your opponent. Then we look at yourself, you become really self aware of you, right? Because we want to sort of address any sort of maybe vulnerabilities that we have, right? So it's becoming really self aware about yourself. And then we dive into healing yourself, healing, reconnecting to yourself. We deal with stress management. We deal with parenting with a narcissist, how to navigate that. We deal with court. I've been to court several times. I know I have a certain process that I follow. So we dive into a lot of different topics in it. So it's kind of an awareness and a healing phase, but lots of tools along the way.
Okay, thanks. And Natalie, incidentally, Bear did find your response quite helpful. That's her comment there. She's had to do that physical separation from the siblings, but
Don't
they still continue to try and torment her.
don't validate poor behavior, right? Make sure you're
Yeah.
in a good place. Don't take the bait. You take the bait, you're on their hook and you're going for a ride, right? So, yeah,
Okay, great.
boundaries.
And here's Shannon. Thank you, guys. I appreciated the program. And we'll just see some of the other comments. Here's Sherry, a dear friend of mine from up north. Hi, Dr. G. Hi, Sherry. Thank you for joining us in. So, as we wrap up, we do have time for another question or two if anybody's out there would like to ask a question specifically about toxic relationships, diagnosing them. Perhaps you're in a toxic relationship right now and you're baffled in terms of what to do, and you're at a crossroads trying to decide whether to try and mend the relationship or whether to sever and break free from that relationship. So, any comments or questions, you're certainly welcome to make them. Um, Natalie, um, why do you think this is such a common topic? Like, why? What? It just seems it's almost endemic when you look around and you see like relationships, like so many relationships are either dysfunctional or frankly fully toxic.
Mhm.
Um, is Did you get that sense that this is a very prevalent problem?
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely, that's why, like, you really got to self examine, right? Look at your childhood. What was your example of love? You know what I mean? Like, it's really about really becoming really aware because these sorts of relationships, they are attracted to certain types of people, right? So
Yes.
ultimately, there's an awareness piece because we don't want to repeat, you know what I mean? These types of relationships. So really, becoming self aware, being real honest with yourself. Um, it's the only way, right? It's the only way we can move forward and grow is by becoming aware and working on our vulnerabilities, right?
What are some of the common ones? Because that takes a lot of insight, like to be in a toxic relationship with a narcissist, but still pull back and say, how did I get myself in this situation, and how do I avoid it again? Because is it something in me that's attracting that pathology? Like, to me, that takes a tremendous amount of discipline and self-reflection. Because
Yes.
like my observation a lot of times is uh, the aftermath of a toxic relationship is someone who's very bitter, very angry, very unforgiving, and really chained to that person. Like they just can't stop
Mhm.
like wanting ill on that person. So, but it's understandable at some level because they're human, right? They've been hurt, they've had heartbreak, they've had
Yes.
fractured dreams. But at the same time, wow, to be able to pull back and say, did I draw this? Like, did I draw? I'm not going to take responsibility for his or her behavior, but
No,
what was it in
no.
me that did I draw this? Like, what are your thoughts as maybe speak on that as well?
Yeah, so in my program, I talk about your childhood, right? So, did you have, like I said, do you have a good example of love, right? Because our example is what we take with us into adulthood, right? So maybe we don't know, right? Also, childhood like beliefs, right? What are your beliefs, right? Oftentimes, there's beliefs around, you get married and you stay married, you don't leave, right? Which can leave people in these situations for longer than they should be. So, we examine your beliefs, we examine your childhood, we examine even sometimes it's just your natural beautiful traits oftentimes is what attracts these people because it's what they don't have, right? But then I talk about also being naive, right? We don't know that these people exist in this world, right? So there can be a part of being naive. But then another part is behavior. So we examine our behaviors, and there's three behaviors that toxic people will gravitate to, and it's people with poor boundaries so that they can exploit them, right? It's people pleasing behaviors. They need a deep, they need admiration, they need praise. So they love people pleasers. Then
Right.
codependency behaviors, right? Where narcissist, the codependent will actually be fed being the giver, whereas the narcissist will be the taker. So it's a very toxic sort of a situation. But those are like the three behaviors that I personally had to really examine in myself, right? And really see that I do exhibit some of those. I did exhibit, or still am struggling exhibiting some of those behaviors, right?
Well, no, it's actually a very poignant point, and I think yeah, like yeah, I think that's a really important point of reflection is that the person that draws a narcissist could be a person that just is compassionate. They want to please the person. They want
Yes,
peace all the time. They want to make the person feel better about themselves. Perhaps they're even trying to save them. Do you think, Natalie, in some cases,
yes,
trying to save them from uh,
absolutely.
toxicity and addiction and whatever else they're going through, and they're trying to be their savior, and so this sounds like a recipe for a catastrophe in the end.
Yes, ultimately, right? Because we cannot save them, right?
Well, it's interesting because I actually after like our interaction, I've had to do some self reflection too because I tend to. I like to be compassionate and kind, and so I don't want to hurt people's feelings, right? So sometimes it draws and creates the wrong message.
Yes. Mhm.
I had someone who created this scenario that we were getting married, like, and she was going around telling my friends that she's going to marry me, and I
Right.
said I didn't get that press release because
Yes.
that's not my plan. I had no inclinations that way. And then when I went to actually set boundaries, which I probably should have set them way back when the behavior began, but when I went to set boundaries, then the person was very angry and said, called me a narcissist just for setting boundaries. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
am I a narcissist, Natalie?
No, no.
So a couple more comments here. The follow up comment from Barry. One of the issues that she's facing is self doubt. The self doubt. Can you maybe comment on that? Did you have some of that self doubt too,
Oh, yeah.
Natalie? Where you're thinking, "Oh man, am I doing the right thing? Is this? Should I still try to salvage marriage? Maybe maybe he needs help. Maybe he really wants to change." Like you go through all those doubts.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, is it, Barry, are you referring to like having self-doubt after you implement boundaries? Or is it
So
just
Barry,
like
you can
general
yeah. So
stuff?
Barry, maybe you can comment on that. And while you're doing that, here's a dear friend of mine, Shannon Beasley. Was in an emotionally abusive relationship with my ex for years ago. He still thinks he did nothing wrong, always says, I never beat you. Big boundaries had to be set, very little communication, but still have kids from the relationship. My children were emotionally wounded due to him. So Shannon is a very kind, compassionate, born again Christian. And boy, this sounds like a lot of anguish, Shannon. You even have a broken heart there, broken heart and prayer. May God bless you and heal you through that. And it must have taken a long time, maybe still going through the healing process. Any comments on Shannon's emotional response there, if you will?
I can actually deeply resonate with you. I want to say that um, forgive yourself, right?
Right.
Because oftentimes we hold a lot of self blame because of the wounds that our children have been inflicted with because of being in these types of relationships, right? Forgive, you have to forgive yourself, right? That's kind of the
Right.
first thing is set yourself free. That was a big problem I had. I self blamed all the time. You need to forgive yourself, right? You didn't inflict
Right.
the wounds, they did, right? And it's very that is that's probably what I struggle with is kind of navigating that because we not only have ourselves dealing with the healing, but we have our children, right? And I can just say, just be in a good place yourself, right? You're in a good place yourself. You can present that example to them.
Hmm.
I know
Yeah.
we
And she,
kids. It resonates. I understand. I understand.
the broken heart for the kids.
Yes.
Can you speak to that, Natalie? Because I mean, that must be. I mean, my understanding is you have custody of the children most or all the time. Like, what is that? What? How has that been like to be like kind of essentially carrying the whole like majority of the parenting for the kids after a toxic relationship?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because you're trying to heal while you're trying to support them, right? But you cannot take responsibility or hold on to what they're doing, right? Ultimately, that's their behavior and they will have the consequences to your behavior. You can only take responsibility for yourself, right? For yourself and being in a good place. Um, yourself is the best support that you can give to them, right? But I understand, right? But those types of feelings, really just kind of prevent us from being able to move forward.
Yes. So here's another comment coming up here from Sandra Kerr. Toxic people try to destroy your self-esteem.
Yeah,
What do you
that's
think of that?
yeah, that's
Is
one
that
of their tactics, right? Because when you have a low self esteem, they're in a place of being you're in a place of being compliant to their manipulation, their control, right? So that's a huge part of the healing process, right? Is reconnecting with yourself and valuing yourself, right? Because if you don't value yourself, other people are not going to find value in you, right? So it's really about really valuing yourself.
hmm And being able to deflect some very hurtful and mean-spirited comments toward you, like being able to say, "No, that's not me. That doesn't identify me." But that's hard as a human, right? When someone says some very vicious things toward you that are meant to wound and hurt. So,
But it's a
um,
reflection of them, right? It's not a
yeah,
reflection of you.
exactly.
What they're saying to you is a projection of their internal state. They don't feel
But
good about
but
themselves,
a
so
people pleaser or someone who's compassionate can take that to heart. It could be extremely wounding emotionally.
yes, don't even respond, right? If they're
I
sending
think
those,
that seems to be the best strategy.
yeah,
So here's so we're building a little bit of momentum, but we will wrap it up
yeah,
soon. But obviously we've triggered a very sensitive nerve, if you will, and people are really responding here, Natalie. So Shannon Beasley says, "In a better place now. Thank goodness for that. Thank God for that." Shannon, they're adults now. Had full custody from the beginning, but he had some visits. So this, I would imagine, you resonates with you too, Natalie.
yes,
You're essentially carrying you're essentially carrying the weight of the care and the development of the children.
hmm yeah,
Okay. And then Bear just follows up with a comment. It comes with gaslighting, constant barrage of verbal abuse from my sister. Oh, this is about the sibling toxicity. I always thought I had a good relationship with.
mhm,
She's my only sibling, many years younger than me, and she's so hateful and mean spirited all the time. So, wow, that's you can palpate the pain and anguish there. And sadly, Natalie. you speak to people, even like in the funeral home industry, and they say some siblings won't come to funerals of the family members because the wounds are so deep. They won't even come and
Mhm.
show their final respects for a loved one that died.
Mhm.
So Shannon, thank God. Yes, literally thank God, Shannon, and thank you so much for your comments, Shannon. So we're going to now go and start to wrapping things up. I just want to get a few final words from you, Natalie. Just maybe speak to the camera there to someone right now who may be in a toxic relationship, and this really resonates with them. Um, what they can do, the kind of care that they can get, and maybe speak about survive to thrive, how they can use the resources that you have researched extensively and have available as well.
Yeah, so I guess my number one thing is there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Things will get better. Oftentimes they get far worse before they get better, but with courage, things do get better. And I'm not saying they get better, but you get better. You get into a place of internal peace,
Mm.
creating that emotional distance, you can get better. And I say this even when you're parenting with them, when you cannot, go no contact. So many survivors, it's like they can't wait till, their children are of age where they can go no contact. It's so sad, right? You can get that now. You can have that peace. You can feel a million times better. You can no longer be triggered by the debate. I can get multiple emails. I'm no longer triggered. I don't respond to majority of them. I leave them responsibility where it belongs. You can get there. It takes
You're really taking back your dignity and value, aren't you, Natalie?
mm,
And that kind of segues back to the spiritual realm,
yes.
and the dignity that God gives us.
Mhm.
Can you speak also, as we conclude, Natalie, about faith and how your faith has helped you through this very difficult journey?
Yeah, like one of my values is that, right? So we know when we honor our values, we're in a good place. So that's definitely been a huge part of my journey, and that's probably the main source of help that I get is through my faith.
Did you find yourself like literally like praying in anguish to God and saying, God, like navigate me through this, help me, give me the strength to get through this, like a very real,
Oh
palpable relationship with God?
yeah, you're at the end of your rope, right? You can't do it anymore, right? You're in a desperate place, right? And he does help us. You know that, right? So
Great. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for your time. You've engaged a lot of our listeners here, and thank you so much for those who listened and made comments. Again, you can get a hold of Natalie through Thrive at tothrive.ca and get information about her extensive program from surviving to thriving. Maybe right now you just feel like you're surviving and you're barely surviving by a
yes,
thread.
yes,
There is hope. There's hope.
yes.
There is a creator, God, that loves you and cares for you, and there are resourceful people like Natalie who's done the work, who's done the very practical work to help you heal, to help you remove yourself from the chains of abuse and toxicity in a relationship. So, Natalie McDowell has been our guest today, a nurse, certified health coach, and neurolinguistic program expert. She's the founder of program Survive to Thrive. Do take the time to contact Natalie at thrive at tothrive.ca. And we thank you so much for joining us here on Doc Talk. Natalie, thank you so much for your time. You did
Thank
an
you,
amazing
everybody.
job.
Thank you so much for giving me your time. I very
Of
much
course.
value that.
Yeah, and you have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for those who listened here today. We'll just check. We're just getting some thank yous as we conclude. Thank you again from Shannon, from Bear. Thank you, Natalie, and Dr. G, and then Shannon thanking God. So thank you very much for joining us on Doc Talk next week again, same time Thursday at 8 p.m. Natalie, thank you so much.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I should have said 7 p.m. Okay, have a good evening.
Take care.